guys, welcome back to Elephants in the Room. If you're watching this on video, obviously you can see this big pillar of light behind me. Yeah, I'm still working on obviously getting our house set up in Nashville, so I actually don't have any blinds or curtains in this room yet, and usually I film at night. But I'm filming right now in the daytime, so ignore that. But we're not going for perfection. We're just going for honesty and realness. And yeah, that kind of is on theme for today's episode. I was trying to decide, and have been trying to decide topics that I want to talk about. And I think that some topics take a lot of preparation. And I like to do my research, and I like to kind of write down bullet points and talking points and different things. So I make sure that I bring value. But sometimes I think it's important or I feel like it's good to just sit down and talk to you guys like you're my friends. I think I said this not on last week's episode, but the week before. I'm starting therapy again with a new therapist. And I thought in spirits of that and in honor of that, or because of that, or however you want me to say it, I should talk about therapy and kind of my journey with therapy. And yeah, just kind of talk about, again, on theme for this podcast, the elephants in the room around therapy and these certain areas or subjects or things we don't talk about within it. And I think that overall, I'm just realizing as I'm trying to process and figure out what I want to do with this podcast, I'm realizing that I don't want this to be, so matter of fact, or I do want to bring you guys value, and I want to, talk about things in a way that's educated, I guess. But I just feel like there's so much information out there, and there's so many informational things that you could go and watch that are better for specific subjects, where I more just want to share my heart with you on things, my experience, and also I think most importantly, the elephants in the room surrounding that thing. I think that I've at times gotten off theme for this podcast, and it's not that I always need to put myself in a box, but when I really sit down and try to process and think about what this podcast is about and what I want it to be about, it's about the elephants in the room, because it's about the things that aren't getting talked about. So I thought about making this episode why you should go to therapy, or do you need therapy, or everything I learned in therapy. And even though I'll share bits and pieces of probably all those things, you could probably find better information for those things from more trusted sources or different sources that specialize. So if you want to learn about, therapy, you could go to an actual therapist account. There's so many amazing psychotherapists and therapists online that talk about therapy and talk about the benefits and all these different things. I think there's so many other sources and places that you can find that information. So I guess what I'm trying to say is yeah, just when I thought about what I wanted this podcast to be about today and how I wanted to go about it, I'm still kind of figuring out how I want to angle things. So I just thought I need to talk to them like they're my friends, and I'm talking to them about therapy. And yeah. So we're just going to dive into all things. But yeah, so let's just trace it back, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit more insight into my therapy journey and when I started therapy, why I started therapy. So for those of you who don't know, which again, anyone who's watching this probably knows by now, I am an ex-Mormon with drug addict parents, and I got married at 18 and then divorced at 21. That's a little bit about me. But when I was I believe I started therapy when I was 19 or 20. I think I was about 20 when I started therapy. And when I started therapy, just to give you some context, or kind of some context around what my life looked like at the time, I was separated from my ex-husband. And we weren't living together. I had moved to Utah from Arizona, which was where I was living when I was married. And we were pretty much split up, but we weren't legally divorced. We were separated, and I was still hopeful that things could work out between us. And then to give you more context into where I was at mentally and physically, it was kind of when me and my ex-husband had first like actually like officially decided we were like gonna get divorced. Now, again, I say that because we had a very toxic relationship and we were on and off for a long time after that, even though we had initially like it had come to the point where the divorce was gonna happen. I moved back to Utah because of that. And yeah, we were technically not divorced, and it took a lot of ups and downs after that to get to the divorce. But all of that to say, considering the fact that I had left Arizona and moved to Utah, and also meanwhile was in the middle of leaving / kind of getting to the point where I accepted that the church wasn't true or that I didn't believe that it was, and leaving Mormonism as well, I was at a really low place. I moved to Utah. I was living with my sister and her husband at the time. And to be just quite frank, like I had hit my rock bottom. It was the most depressed that I had ever been. It was the most anxious that I had ever been. I like just physically and mentally was not okay when I moved to Utah to live with my sister. I literally was living with her in a vacation rental because at the time she was living in a different place and wanted to be in a warmer place for the summer. So she moved into this vacation rental and I was able to live in this vacation rental with her. And yeah, to really put it frankly, I was just absolutely not okay. Like I was having panic attacks every day. I couldn't sleep. I was depressed. I was anxious. I was just not okay. So what actually led me to start therapy and to start seeing my old therapist was a family friend, I guess you could say, was going through a separation / divorce with his significant other and or his spouse, and he was seeing that therapist, my old therapist. And so he had happened to come over to our house or to our vacation rental and was kind of telling us a little bit about his experience with her and, you know, how she was really helpful and whatever. And I don't know what it was in me, but for whatever reason, I was like desperate for anything and I knew that I needed help. So I said, hey, like, you know, I'd like to see her if she's open. And so he gave me her phone number and contact information, and I reached out to her and, you know, told her a little bit about my situation, and then I started seeing her. And when I started therapy, I think it was like $130 a session or something, which at the time was a lot of money for me because I was working at a shoe store full time to try to support myself. And it was a lot of money considering the fact that I attempted to go once a week, but because of how broken I was going 2 to sometimes 3 times a week because I literally was not okay. Like I literally needed it. So yeah, when I started therapy, you know, I've kind of briefly mentioned this and talked about this, but I pretty much went in and she asked me about myself, asked me about my story. And then she gave me, you know, analysis, I guess you could say. And she also made me take the ACEs childhood trauma test. And if you guys have never heard about the ACEs childhood trauma test, it's online. It pretty much rates your trauma from a 1 to 10. So you go through this questionnaire of 10 questions of things that happened in your home. Example, if your parents ever had a drug or alcohol addiction, or if your parents ever abused you, or if you were ever touched sexually or whatever. It goes through all these traumatic childhood experiences and you pretty much put a 1 down if you've experienced it. So you score anywhere from 1 to 10, 10 being the most severe, you know, 1 being the least severe. And they say, and I did a whole episode on this, so I won't like super go into it, but anyone who scores above a 4 is like severely impacted, and it severely impacts their life for a long time until they can get help. Like it's crazy. Like there's studies about mental illness, about success, about health, all these different things, and like how much your percentage goes up of some of these bad things if you've experienced or endured more than the 4 on the childhood trauma test, the ACEs test. So it's really crazy. But I went in and I scored a 9. Yeah, so I went in and I scored, and then she pretty much said, hey, like, you have high anxiety, high panic disorder, and yeah, just really bad anxiety and very like mild depression at the time. Because I've always tend to be more anxious, which is interesting because when I was a kid, I didn't think I had anxiety or experienced any anxiety, but I think it's because I just wasn't able to identify what anxiety was. Like, I had panic attacks as a kid, but I didn't like really understand what that, even meant. So yeah, when I started my therapy journey with her, like I said, it was really, really tough. And I think I initially went into therapy, honestly, with the motive to just survive, but also with the motive to like fix my marriage. Cause like at the time, that's what I wanted. And looking back, like, I'm so thankful to the Lord that didn't happen. But at the time, that's what I thought that I wanted. And that was my goal with therapy, was like, I just need to be okay. And I just need to fix my marriage. And I went into therapy and none of those things happened. I did become okay. I did eventually become okay. But anyways, all that to say, what did my therapy journey look like? Well, it was really scary and it was really vulnerable and it was really, really humbling. I think if I could describe it in any way, because I think when I went in there, I just went in there with this idea of like what I thought I knew and who I thought I was. And I thought I was just this really loving person, and I am a loving person, but I didn't understand the depth of how much my trauma had impacted me and also impacted the decisions that I made, the partner that I chose. There's so many layers to all of that. And I think a lot of my trauma responses and or unhealthy habits that I had developed from my childhood, I believe that they were just personality traits, and they weren't. So like being codependent and being a people pleaser. Like, I think we all joke about that and talk about it like, oh, I'm a people pleaser, I'm an empath, I'm, whatever. Not realizing that it's actually extremely unhealthy and it's not like a personality thing. It's usually a trauma response and a learned behavior from toxicity. And for me, codependency and people pleasing was a means to survive through my childhood and then through my marriage as well. And so it's what I had to be able to exist with the unhealthy people in my life and their unhealthy dynamics, if that makes any sense. So really quick, I learned that all these things that I thought were like my personality weren't, and that a lot of them were actually, again, deeply rooted in trauma, but also in a way they were selfish because I wanted to control the outcome of situations. Like, that is something I've always done since I was young, and I'm so thankful for the progress that I've made. But I have always done everything right so nothing bad will happen to me. And I think that's rooted in just, the PTSD of everything that has happened to me, and also just the desire for stability and control over my life, because my life has always been so out of my control. Because since I was young, everyone else's choices have resulted in really crappy circumstances for me. Like, I am directly impacted by their choices. And so I thought that I could like choose my way out of it. Like, oh, well, if I do everything right, then I'm never going to end up in this situation. And if I do everything right, I'm never going to be like my parents. And if I do everything right, I'm never going to have a divorce. I'm never going to, go through all these different things. And then I quickly learned that that's just not the case, because just because I do everything quote unquote right, and just because I repay like evil with good, and I, would do anything to make something work, and I would, I'm trying to describe what I'm trying to think here. Like, I think a lot of times, or I thought, like a trauma response is like, you can like make up for the bad with your good, if that makes sense. So like, if someone treats you wrong in a relationship or does something wrong or something's not working, like, you lower your standards and you minimize yourself. You would like do anything to make the relationship work. And that's how I was in my life with really all of my relationships, but especially the unhealthy ones, I would do anything to make them work, even if that meant sacrificing my own well-being to the point of literally being like abused, not physically, but like, yeah, I don't want to say too much in that regards, but hopefully that brings some clarity. My therapy journey was, like I said, extremely humbling. So I had to accept and learn all that. My therapist gave me a task to complete, which was such a pivotal part of my therapy, was writing out a trauma timeline. And if you guys have never heard of what that is, it's pretty much like literally going through everything that's ever happened in your life and writing down any traumatic event or adverse event that was stressful to your life or hard on you or whatever. So my trauma timeline was 18 pages. And what was so hard about writing out my trauma timeline is that all of this trauma that I had and all that I had lived through, number one, I didn't see how actually unhealthy and abnormal it was, because I think when you're in a situation, you just think that that's how it is. I mean, as kids, especially, like the environment we grow up in, like that's all we've ever known. And so like, that's just what we believe is the way that life goes. And until you're adult, usually you start to talk to people like therapists, you start to see, oh, wow, like this actually isn't normal. And this like actually isn't okay. But I like thought it was because it was just like my circumstances and my life. But yeah, so like I had to see all that and accept all that. And when I was writing my 18-page trauma timeline, I had blocked out so much of what had happened to me. So when I sat down with that pen and paper and I started to try to remember each year of my life and the things that happened to me, not only was it really hard, but I literally felt like I couldn't remember. And then what was so tricky about it is as I would start to write something down, I would start to remember or have flashbacks to things that I didn't even know happened or like didn't even think about that had happened. And so as I started to write down one thing, I'd be like, oh, wait, this happened. But it literally felt like I was a stranger inside my body because I didn't like actually remember any of those things happening. It was like things kept coming back to me. And I didn't learn this until later, but you know, as kids, one of the ways that we cope with trauma is we just block it out. Like we literally just block it out from our reality. So it took me multiple weeks to actually work through and write through this trauma timeline. And let me tell you, it was extremely triggering, extremely hard, and extremely upsetting. And yeah, it was super hard. And once I wrote out my trauma timeline, from there, we started to work through my trauma and start to identify and accept what I had been through, what it had done to me, and how I had then and was walking/living in those unhealthy coping mechanisms that I had developed from what had happened to me and how it actually affected my current life. Because what happens to you or what happened to you isn't your fault, but what you choose to do with it does matter because it is your life. And so it's like, even though all of those things had happened to me, I had to take accountability and responsibility for the fact that I was choosing, again, without my knowledge, because at the time that was the best that I could do, but I was choosing to live in and walk in that trauma and not change, not be different than what I knew. I was walking in the footsteps of my parents, even though I didn't think I was, you know? And again, not to say that I was doing drugs, not to say that I was doing anything bad, but I was not breaking that generational trauma. I was still living in it and walking in it. And, yeah, I had to accept that. And it was super hard. And, you know, a big part of my therapy journey was also just learning to love myself. And, yeah, I mean, I just truly didn't have any love for myself. And through the combination of my therapist and her knowledge and her wisdom, and through the Bible, the Word of God, I was able to learn to love myself. And I know this may be contrary to popular belief, but I believe that you can work with a therapist while also making Jesus your primary center for healing. Like, just because I was with a therapist during my healing journey, and I attribute a lot of my success to getting to a healthy place and to healing, to therapy, I believe that it was all orchestrated by God. And I implemented and used the word of God in my therapy practices to ultimately start to heal from everything that happened to me. I think there's such a, misunderstanding around therapy and Christianity, and that you can't have both, and that you can't accredit therapy over Jesus or whatever. And I just believe that God created the universe. He created our brains. And I also believe that he has gifted people to be in certain positions. And not only that, but truly at the core, therapists learn about how the brain works, how it responds, all these different things. Like, these are things that God created. And they have just taken the time to learn and understand them and help us understand them on a bigger scale, And so I think, yes, at times, therapists and therapy practices can tend to be a little bit pagan, and can also tend to be a lot more about kind of making yourself your own God and, like I said, pagan. But I do think that there is a way to do both. I think you can be Christian and go to God for healing ultimately, but I also think that therapy is such a beautiful tool that we can use on earth that I believe God has gifted us. And for the people who say, oh, well, just pray, have enough faith, God will heal you, read the Bible, he'll heal you. Yes, like, Jesus can heal you. I believe that. But also, sometimes you do need therapy. Sometimes you actually do. Because there's a lot of fundamental parts of our brain and of how our brains work in our bodies and how complex trauma is that we need to know and understand to actually help us work through things. And not only that, but therapy gives you like actual not physical, but it gives you very practical tools that you can use within relationships and within your own life to have healthiness. And I believe that God wants us to be healthy. And I believe that God wants us to learn about the way that our brains work and the way that our bodies work and be knowledgeable and have wisdom. And I think that that can be deeper than just through the Bible, because again, I believe that God created psychology. He created the brain. And I just think that therapy is such a beautiful thing. And so I think there's such a stigma around it. And I've had a lot of people say like, oh, like, don't give the credit to therapy, like give it to Jesus. And like, when I tell you guys, when I went through my healing journey and I left the Mormon church and I got divorced, and again, therapy and Jesus gave me the courage to get there. Ultimately, it was Jesus, but God heavily used therapy for me to get me to the place where I had enough love and self-respect to walk away from my marriage and to also walk away from the religion that I grew up in. And I was not healthy or able enough to do that before I started therapy. I truly wasn't. Therapy gave me the tools to actually implement and walk through that trauma and walk through that codependency, walk through that people pleasing, walk through that lack of self-love, that lack of self-identity that I didn't have, and start to break through those chains. And I truly stand by that. And it's hard. I can't sit here and tell you guys every layer of what I went through in therapy and every little thing, or we would be here all day. But I hope that gives you guys a general picture of, what therapy was for me and what kind of some of the things that it did for me. Like I said, it helped me identify, unfortunately, that I was unhealthy. I was in unhealthy relationships. My relationship with my family wasn't healthy. And actually the ways that it impacted and affected me. And it gave me enough courage to stand up for myself and to stand for change and to make changes in my life. And therapy taught me that I can't control anyone but myself. I can't control people's reactions. I can't control people's lives. I can't clean up after people's messes. All I can do is take care of myself and be the healthiest version that I can be of myself and love myself the best I can. So I have a full cup of water where I can give to people. I can pour into other people's lives, but taking care of your basic needs, and your basic needs also include like your emotions, your mental well-being, isn't selfish. Like, it's not un-Christ-like, it's not selfish to do that. It's actually really loving. And until you can really get there, I feel like you won't really make progress. And I had to learn that. And that was really, really hard for me to learn. And therapy helped me get there, if that makes sense. There was so many times that I went into therapy and my therapist told me things that I didn't want to hear, things that I didn't want to accept. I thought I knew, and I thought that I could kind of create my reality. And more importantly, I really, really thought that if I worked hard enough and if I loved enough and if I gave enough, that I could make a relationship work or that I could make a relationship healthy. And that's just not true. Like, it's just not. Like, you have to really accept and let go of that idea. And all of that to say, let's get into kind of the logistics of therapy. But yeah, so when I first started going to therapy, I was going like 2 or 3 times a week, or even if I was just going once a week, I would do like 2 or 3 hour sessions because I was like not okay. And then eventually I started doing it just once a week. But what I will say is a lot of what happens in therapy is you go in and you obviously get to share your story and your heart and what's going on in your current life with someone who is not only an expert on the brain, psychology, all that stuff, but also is unbiased. Like, a therapist literally has no bias. That's what's really good about a therapist versus a friend or a family member, is oftentimes when we're talking to a friend or a family member, they already have a perspective, an opinion, a motive, whatever it is that will sway the advice that they give you. So with a therapist, the good news and the bad news is that they're unbiased, which oftentimes can result in them being really brutally honest with you. And a lot of the times my therapist told me things I literally did not want to hear. Like, if you're going to go to therapy, and through anyone's therapy journey, like, it is a lot of pushback, truthfully. And I used to fight with my therapist. Like, I would literally be like, oh, okay, like, I see something this way. And then she'd be like, okay, fair enough. Like, and she would literally set me up. Like, she would let me, like, quote unquote, do what I want in a situation or in a relationship. And then I would come back the following week and she would literally, like, tell me what happened before I even told her. She'd be like, oh, so how's this week? And I'd be like, oh yeah, this. And she's like, oh, well, did this happen? Did this happen? And then I'd be like, how did you literally know that happened? And it's because she knew what was going on in my relationships and in my life before I even would have to tell her. And she knew what I didn't want to accept. And I had to accept what she was telling me. And it was really hard. About people in my life that I loved, she would tell me this person's this, and I'd be like, no. And then she would literally prove to me in time through my actions and through different things that she was right. And I was like, dang. Like, she's right about all this stuff, and I don't want her to be right. I want to be right, and I want, what I want to work out. And like I said, I went in with the motive that my marriage was going to work and, that all these things. And I came out of therapy an ex-Mormon, divorced, and having really, really different relationships with my parents. So I am super and was super bonded and close to my parents, and specifically my mom. And in therapy was when I first learned how unhealthy my relationship with my mom was and how much it actually affected my day-to-day life, and that I needed to set boundaries with her. So yeah, it was hard. It was super hard, but I went to therapy on and off. Well, not on and off. I went to therapy, I think, consecutively for about 1.5 years, through kind of that transition period of me leaving my marriage and also leaving the religion. And yeah, it just served such a purpose. It became something I looked forward to so much. It became such a sense of stability and encouragement for me. And it really helped me get my power back and helped me learn to love myself and help me also kind of break through some of the, I feel like, toxicity within the even Christian church and culture as well as the Mormon culture. And I had this idea that to be Christ-like, I had to be a people pleaser and I had to let people, you know, do whatever they wanted to me and still love them. And truly, like, that's just not the case. You can love someone and not have a relationship with them. You can love someone and set boundaries. You can love someone, but love yourself enough to know that the way they're treating you isn't acceptable and that you're not going to accept that love. And you also can love someone enough to know that you can't save them. You can't fix them. Only they can. And God can help them through it, but that person has to be willing. And there's literally nothing you can do to get someone to that place. Like, other people's lives have nothing to do with you. And if someone's choices are affecting you negatively and hurting you, you have the ability to walk away, to set boundaries. And if you don't do that, and you continue to stay in something that is hurting you, it does also fall on you. Now, with that being said, what I learned is, hey, here I am in this situation. And I think once I started to identify and accept everything that my therapist had told me about my life and about my trauma and about who I was and about where I was, I started to actually be angry at myself for letting myself be in all these situations and relationships and letting my life get to that point. And then I had to remember that I did the best that I could with the information that I was given. If I could go back and walk through everything I walked through with the information I know now, I would walk through it differently, 100%. But at the time, that's the best that I knew how I could do. And that's the best that I could do. And I have to give myself grace for that. And even now, I think through my therapy journey, if I've learned anything, it's that it is so easy to know information and to have information. And that's empowering, but it is really easy to fall back into old habits and into old patterns because trauma is so complex. And a lot of what we've learned and a lot of what we've developed over the years, it's so deeply rooted in us, and it takes constant work to not be those ways and to not fall into those unhealthy habits. And it's really hard. So that kind of leads me into my next point of kind of some of the I feel like maybe not misconceptions, but I don't know. I think therapy has become really glamorized. I think generally this generation is kind of waking up to the fact that we all need therapy and help. And I think we're a very woke generation. And so there's a lot of hype around therapy. You need therapy. Everyone needs therapy. I learned this in therapy. And again, I really do think that there are a lot of therapists that are very not only anti-God, but very pagan. And it's this big kind of self-love movement, self-love, love yourself, choose yourself. And hey, I stand by that, but not in the way that I feel like the world has made it, because it's this very selfish, narcissistic, I feel, way to love yourself in a lot of ways is what we're pushed to do. Only care about your own feelings, love, self-love. I don't know. I just feel like the self-love movement right now is it's gotten to this extreme where it's I don't know. I think at the end of the day, it's yes, love yourself, but also if you go too far and you disregard everyone else's feelings and lives and your morals, and it's all about the way that you feel, I just feel like that's not really the true nature of self-love. I feel like self-love is not about feelings. loving yourself isn't always going to feel good. And it's not always about like, oh, what makes me happy and what makes me feel good. It's like, yes, that's important. But I also feel like there's morality. There's, there's just so much. There's so much that goes into that. There's our character. And I think sometimes actually practicing self-love is hard. Like it's uncomfortable. It doesn't always feel good. But I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense, but all that to say, like, I think there's a lot of hype around therapy. I think it's become a big thing. I think that something good can get distorted. And ultimately, we can use anything for whatever we want to use it for. So it's not to say that all therapists are good, that everyone's experience in therapy is good, that therapy is always helpful for people. I know there's a lot of bad therapists out there. I know there's a lot of bad practices out there that kind of teach things that I don't believe are good. Like, I think that there's a lot of corruption within the space of therapy, but as is everything in life. So I think it is important to find a good therapist. Like, that is important, and I didn't say this before, but I did work with a therapist when I was still married in Arizona for couples therapy. I only ever did like maybe 4 sessions with her, but my experience with her was not good. She didn't, truly all I felt like she did was sit there and listen to what I said and validate me. And I was not called out by her. There was not really truth in that. And also, yes, she was there for me to rant to, but she wasn't really there for me to better my life and to be a healthier person. When I started going to my old therapist, which I love, she actually challenged me. She told me truth, but she also did it in a graceful, loving way. And not only that, but beyond my therapy sessions, and this is another point I want to make, it takes more than just going to therapy to like be healthy. Like, I went to therapy and my therapist would literally give me homework like I was back in school for the week. She'd be like, okay, I want you to go home and I want you to write down, how, whatever. She would give me homework. I can't think of it right now, but I had homework. So even outside of that hour or that 2 hours with my therapist weekly, I was at home reflecting and working on the things I needed to work on. And so therapy is so much bigger than just going to therapy. It's taking the tools and the information that you're learning and actually implementing them into your day-to-day life. And that's really hard. And I want to talk about why that's hard. This is another thing. Again, yes, therapy is kind of like, glamorized right now and everyone talks about it. But I think there is this disconnect between the earlier generation and us, like a lot of our parents, because a lot of them, especially in a religious sense, never really learned any of these things. They never learned about boundaries and healthiness and unhealthiness and toxicity and all these big words that we all use, which is a whole nother thing. I think that because all of that has been so glamorized, we all throw around words. We throw around the word narcissist. We throw around the word gaslight. We throw around the word manipulation, when a lot of the times that's not actually what it is. And those are serious, serious things. But I think we dilute, or not dilute, but those statements and or things aren't taken seriously anymore because people just throw them around. And it's like, okay, maybe that person wasn't gaslighting you. You're just using that. It's like, no, these are like serious things. Like, calling someone a narcissist is actually like narcissism is a personality disorder that is diagnosed. It's not just something we throw around. Gaslighting, all these things, like, they're serious matters. But I feel like because there's been this big like movement around therapy and self-love and all these things, we throw around these words, which I'm not saying that we shouldn't talk about these things, not saying that you need a therapist to tell you, hey, that's gaslighting for you to know. But I do think that we do need to like be more careful about using these words and talking about these things, because they are serious matters and we don't want to dilute them. And I think the older generation doesn't take it as seriously because it's kind of so thrown around. Like, I know a lot of older people that have been like, oh, kids and all their statements, gaslighting, whatever. Like, they don't take it seriously. And obviously it's a serious thing, but I think that earlier generation, they didn't go to therapy. Like, therapy wasn't really a thing like it is now. And not only therapy, but I think in general, self-help and healthiness and psychology is a lot more talked about, even just on social media. I think we all have a better understanding for it now than we used to. And so people are actually standing up and standing out and making changes and breaking that generational trauma and setting boundaries and standing up for themselves and pursuing healthier lives. And I don't mean healthier physically, I mean mentally and emotionally. And our parents and that older generation just isn't used to that, because the way that they lived is they just put their head down and did it, right? It's like, you don't question what your parents say. You just put your head down and do it. You don't set boundaries with your family. They're family. It's your mom. It's your dad. It's your brother. You don't remove yourself from them. You don't question what they say, right? Like, that's kind of the way that they were taught. And so now we're this like woke generation that is implementing all these things and that is setting boundaries and that is stepping out and making changes. And I think it's really uncomfortable for our parents and for that earlier generation. And I can't blame them, because it's like, that's not something that they've ever known. And so it's really tricky. But all of that to say, I think what's actually hard, one of the hard things about starting therapy is that you are most likely, especially if you come from an unhealthy family environment or relationship, you are going to be the crazy person for going to therapy. You're going to be seen as weak. You're going to be seen as, oh, you need help. And I think that's a misconception. And I know it's talked about, and I'm not the first person to say this, but guys, going to therapy does not make you weak. It does not make you a problem or that you have problems. Like, to be frank, we all have things that we need to work through and work on. And if you think that you don't, you're just not living in truth and reality. At the end of the day, even the people who don't have traditionally traumatic childhoods or have been through traditionally traumatic relationships, generally, there are things in our lives that have happened that have impacted the way that we see the world and the way that we operate, and we may not even know it. And therapy is a space where you're able to go and see why you do certain things and expose some of those unhealthy things within you that you do, unhealthy coping mechanisms, unhealthy behaviors, whatever it is, unhealthy ideas of the world, perspectives, whatever it is. Because oftentimes we are just such a product of our environment. And so just what we learn and, the things that we've gone through in our life, they all kind of combine to then create who we are as adults and, even young adults, and what we believe about the world. And I feel like therapy, a good therapist really makes you question and test that in a really good, positive way. But yeah, when you start therapy, I think oftentimes you will be the odd man out, especially, like I said, if you're in an unhealthy situation with family or with a relationship. And I think there is a judgment that can be placed on people that start therapy because they feel like it's not necessary. And it's sad because I know a lot of people who have gone to their parents and said, hey, mom, dad, I want therapy. And because of the parents' own pride, they are offended and don't support or don't let you go to therapy because they don't want to own or accept that some of the things that they've done have affected you. And I know I've said this before, but I'll say it again. Just because you've been hurt by your parents and things that they've done or situations that have happened in your life doesn't make them bad parents. Like, no one is perfect. But on the other end, from a parental perspective, just because your kids are affected by things that have happened to them, like, that doesn't mean you're a bad parent, but it also doesn't mean that, like, the things you've done haven't affected them. Like, they have. Like, both can exist. You can have parents who tried their best, and you can also have kids who are traumatized or who are hurt or affected by things that have happened to them or things that you've done. Like, that's just the nature of life. It's going to naturally happen because we're imperfect beings, because of all the things going on in the world, whatever it is. And so it's really sad that oftentimes kids will want to go to therapy to be the best versions of themselves or to help themselves, or if they're struggling with anxiety or depression, and parents invalidate that because they're so prideful. They don't want to feel like they did something wrong. But it's like, maybe it's just not about you. And so I want to encourage you that if you're wanting to start therapy, whether you're a teenager, specifically, mainly if you're still living with your parents, or even if you're not, maybe you're still financially supported by them, they're still heavily involved in your life. You may not be supported or understood when you start therapy, and that's okay. It's okay to feel like the odd man out, because most of the people in your life are operating out of what they know. So when you step out and doing something a little different, even if it's actually the healthiest thing for you and them, they may not agree nor understand, and that's okay. You're not always going to be understood within it. When I first started going to therapy and I first started setting boundaries with my family, they didn't get it. A lot of them thought, she's changing. She's not as nice. And it was like, yeah, because I'm actually sticking up for myself, setting boundaries. And I think people get stuck and comfortable with who you are, and especially toxic people or people that are mentally, physically, emotionally abusive. They like you the way you are. They like you traumatized because they know they can do whatever they want to you. And you'll still love them. You'll still give them whatever they want. So when you start to get healthy and you start to set boundaries and retract, they don't like that. They don't. And I know I've talked about boundaries before, but boundaries, that is the biggest and best thing I've learned from therapy. Truly, that is one of the most important things I've learned. And I have a whole episode on healthy boundaries, so I don't want to sit here and go into them right now because I would sit here and talk about them forever. But if you want to know more about healthy boundaries, you can go and listen to that episode, or you can also just go and research healthy boundaries because there's so many things about them. But that was a big part of therapy. Or a big benefit of therapy for me. But yeah, it's uncomfortable. Going to therapy is uncomfortable, and also implementing the actual tools that they give you are uncomfortable. And also it's going to take time, and also it takes work outside of that therapy office. It takes work in your actual life. But what I will say is the beautiful thing about therapy is I went to therapy for like 2.5 years. And unfortunately, that therapist I stopped seeing because she had a personal life thing come up and she actually doesn't see people, or wasn't able to see people anymore at the time. So I had to stop seeing her, which was such a bummer because she was with me through my whole divorce and leaving the church. And then even leading up to me first meeting my boyfriend, David, she actually met David and did some couples work with us as well. And I love her. I feel like she knows me better than anyone else. And she's just so amazing. I walked through so much with her. So it was really hard to walk away from her. And then for the last little, like 2-ish years, I've kind of been in and out of therapy inconsistently with someone it hasn't been like super official. And she's been great too. But now I'm walking into this new season with a new therapist that I'm meeting on Friday. And tomorrow, me and David are actually starting couples therapy with another new therapist. And it made me kind of think and consider, what it would feel like to kind of restart therapy and or start with someone new, and kind of the fear around it. So that's kind of why I'm talking about this and why I want to talk about it, because I want to encourage you guys. And yeah, some of those things I'm going through, it's like, I have to like start with someone new, and like, what if I'm misunderstood, and all these different things, which I want to talk about. But yeah, so like, let's go back to the basics, which is like starting with a therapist. And again, I've already started with one, but now I'm starting with a new one. So I want to walk you through some of like the things that I feel like, again, don't get talked about, the elephants in the room and the uncomfortable parts of it. The first part that's scary about starting with a new therapist or a therapist is this feeling of, I am like literally letting this person into my life, this stranger into my life, to literally like analyze and judge me. But my rebuttal to that, because I've been in therapy and I've seen the benefits of it, is this person is literally just there, like unbiasedly. You are literally paying this person to give you the best professional advice they can on your life to have the healthiest, happiest life. That's awesome. And also, like, it can be customized to whatever matters to you. Like, for example, something that's important to me is like, I obviously believe in Jesus and I believe in the Bible. And so I like to tend to go to not a Christian therapist, but a therapist who understands and or shares the same values as me, because that helps give them a groundwork for, like, you know, the groundwork of me. So that's something. And as scary as it is getting to know someone new, it's also beautiful because it unfortunately and fortunately lets you kind of re-walk through your life and everything that's happened to you. And so as I'm going into this new season of starting therapy again, I'm in such a different place than I used to be, obviously. And I feel like I've learned and grown so much in my journey of healthiness, but I know that I have so much more to go. And yeah, I think therapy generally is important, but I think it's also obviously what we do with that therapy and what we do with the information we learn. But yeah, I think when you go to therapy, yeah, you think once you learn something, you're just going to know it and then you'll never, you know, react the same again or fall into those unhealthy habits again. And I think it's easy to do so. And I also think there's so many layers and pieces and parts of healing. And even though I've done so much work on my healing, I know that I have more to do, because not only does what we've been through and what we grew up in and what we learned affect us, but it also affects our relationships. And so, like, my goal of therapy and my goal of kind of starting with this new therapist is, obviously I wanted someone in person that was in Nashville, someone that I can see consistently. And now that we like bought this house here, we're obviously going to be here for a long time. So someone that I can, like, you know, kind of grow with and lean into and hopefully be with for a long time. But also, I want to be the healthiest, happiest, and best version of myself for my relationship and also for our future marriage. And I want to do all of the hard work that we both have to do to be the best we can, to have the healthiest relationship we can before we get married, before we have kids specifically, because I do not want to carry any of my trauma or my unhealthy behaviors or whatever into my children's life. Like, I want to be the healthiest version of myself that I can be as a human. And I also want me and David to be the healthiest versions of ourselves within our relationship and have our relationship be the healthiest it can before we have kids and before all these things. So I just feel like therapy, it's kind of like one of those things that you don't necessarily see the results from immediately. It's kind of like going to the gym. It's like you go to the gym and it's not like you come home and have results right away. You may feel a little stronger. You may start to look a little stronger. But like generally to see actual progress, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of hard work. But it's also preventative care. And so it's like when I think about health and wellness and supplements and exercise and all these things, it's like you are doing them in a sense as a preventative care for the long term. It's like you may not see the benefits from those things right now, but in the grand scheme of things, all of the healthy things you do now will add up and result in a healthier life moving forward, if that makes sense. So that's why I'm excited about starting therapy again, but it is scary. It is uncomfortable. It is a lot of work. And it's not always what you think. And yeah, I'm obviously starting with this new therapist. I don't know if she's going to be good. I think she's going to be good. She's actually a reference from someone that we know who's awesome. So we think we have individual therapists and then we have a couples therapist and whatever. But anyways, I'm nervous. I'm excited. I'm scared. but I've done this before. But yeah, I just feel like starting therapy again kind of reminded me of like when I started it for the first time. And then it just made me want to get on here and talk to you guys and encourage you guys. And yeah, I just think therapy is one of those things that's complex and confusing and hard to really tackle. And I wish I could sit here and tell you guys exactly how to find a good therapist and who to find a good therapist through. But I will say you want someone that is honest, that is loving, and that challenges you truly, because I feel like that's where you can make true change. And if you can't afford therapy, I talked a little bit about this on my episode with Matthias Barker. He's a psychotherapist. You can still obtain and learn a lot of tools through people like him. Therapists, psychotherapists online, psychology books. Like, you can still learn about healthiness. You can still learn about trauma. You can still learn about all that stuff. So I encourage you to do that. And I also encourage you to find someone in your life, a trusted person in your life, to be able to share things with, because we all need to let stuff out. I mean, that's a big part of healing, is just letting it out. Is literally just being able to share your heart and feel heard and feel validated. And so I encourage you to try to find a safe person to do that with, and also find resources to learn more about healthier habits and relationships and things that you can do to get there. And if you can afford a therapist or have the means to, I encourage you to spend your time trying to find a good one. And also, just like relationships, not everyone's compatible. Just because you start with a therapist or go to a therapist and it doesn't work out with them and you don't feel safe and comfortable and good with them, doesn't mean that you won't find the right fit. Like I said, the first therapist that I went to, I don't feel like it was really helpful for me. But my second therapist, which was my main therapist, she changed my life. And I love her so much. And so now, obviously, I'm trying this new therapist, and my hope and my prayer is that I like her and that she's a good fit. But if she's not, I will continue searching and seeking to find someone who is. And I'm so blessed to have the means to be able to afford a therapist. And again, if you don't, that's okay. You can still learn, you can still grow, you can still have support. But I will encourage you, if you are able to find a therapist, I think it's awesome. I think it can be helpful, but I think it's complex. And I think that, I can't give you an exact direction for how or who to find a good therapist through, but I believe that you can find one, and I believe that it's a journey. And just like anything, it's complicated and not one shoe fits all, but I just hope that my story inspires and or helps you guys see that there's nothing wrong with therapy. There's nothing wrong with you. You don't have to be a result of what you've been through. You can make changes. You're only in control of yourself. And if you're at the rock bottom in your life right now, the only way is up. And if I could go back and tell myself anything, the traumatized 19-year-old girl who never thought that she'd have hope again, who never thought that she'd be okay again, who never thought that she'd be healthy, who never thought that she'd have love again. If I could go and give her a hug and tell her, hey, everything falling apart in your life is actually preparing for you, is actually preparing you for everything to fall into place. And the analogy or the little picture you guys have probably seen of God, it's Jesus, and he's holding a big teddy bear behind his back. And there's a little girl in front of him, and she's holding a little teddy bear. And she's looking at God and she's saying, God, I love it. I don't want to let it go. And God's looking at her and he's saying, just trust me, because he has a bigger teddy bear behind him. If my life isn't a representation of that, I don't know what is. But for me to get to where I am today and know my life is not perfect, and know, I'm not just happy and everything's amazing. No, there are hard things going on in my life, but God has redeemed and restored everything in my life. And part of that journey was therapy, because I would have never gotten out of some of those unhealthy situations and relationships that I was in without those tools and without that help. And again, I believe that God was in it all and he orchestrated it all, but I do believe that he used it. So if you're feeling hopeless, if you're feeling like your life is over, I promise it's not. I promise there's hope for you. I promise there's healing for you, and you're not alone in the struggle. So I love you guys so much. Thanks for sitting here with me and talking with me today. And I, again, sometimes I just feel like I'm talking into this mic and I don't know if it's doing anything or even matters, but I just hope and pray that God uses this and that it helps just one of you feel less alone and just helps one of you in your journey of finding love for God, finding love for yourself, or just getting to a healthier place in life. And even if you don't believe in God, just getting to a place, getting through something and being okay, because you can be. And it's okay if you're not right now. But yeah, I love you guys so very much. Thank you guys for listening. And you guys know, if you want to support me, you can share this podcast with a friend, share it on your story, leave me a review. That helps me so much. 5 stars if you can. Comment, DM me, let me know what you guys want to talk, what you want me to talk about, what topics you want me to talk about. Anything that you're scared to ask, just ask me, because that's my whole goal, is to answer and talk about the things that people don't talk about. And I'm not perfect and I don't have all the information in the world, but I just want to be here with you guys and walk in community with you guys. So yeah, I love you guys so much. I'll close this episode out by saying, what elephants are in your room? My name is Nicole, and I'll talk to you guys next week.